Ever feel like the game is already over by stage 3? Everyone else hits their board while you're stuck with 1 star, no gold, no health, and no bit. It's not bad luck, it's just bad habits. Today I'm going to break down 10 early game mistakes that high elo players never make, and how you can fix them to start winning more games in set 14. And make sure you also do every single one of them, because doing one is not enough. Let's get into it. The first one is not scouting early. During stage 2, even stage 1, it's very important to scout. Sometimes people get a key reroll piece with good items on stage 1, so you know that comp's off limits. In stage 2, during the augment picking phase, if people take a lot of trait related augments or even a hero augment, again, you know that's off the board now. Essentially, if you're not scouting early, you don't have to do it often, but just doing it at least once. If you're not doing that, you're just flying blind, and I don't know why you're even watching a video on how to climb, because if you don't put the effort in, how can you expect to get better? But high elo players scout early to avoid contested comps, track item slams, and also assess the strength of the lobby. That way they know whether the lobby is going to be strong this time or weak, and then play around that accordingly. For example, if everyone's playing Cypher and trying to lose streak, your mediocre board can sometimes go on a 5-game win streak in those lobbies because everyone else is lose streaking. You don't know that if you don't scout, and you'll think you'll just have a mediocre board, sell everything, make 10 gold instead, and then end up getting outscaled by all the Cypher players. So how do we fix this? Well, you need to scout at least once. I do once in stage 1, once in early stage 2, in pretty much all my games. Most times though, I do a lot more than that, and I scout constantly if I have nothing else to do. And you should be doing active scouting. Are you contested? What items did people slam? Because sometimes you don't know what comp someone's going if they're doing a fast 8, because they could flex into different comps, but their item slams tell you what they're aiming for. What traits are they running? Are people leveling very aggressively? Are people staying very low level? Find out before it's too late. The next mistake you're probably doing is waiting for perfect items, because you're going to be bleeding a lot of health for no reason if you do this. What you need to do is identify which items are important and not important for your specific team comp. For example, if you're playing 4 marksman, 4 vanguard, which is a very attack damage focused comp, and you get a tier, you don't need this item, right? Like, it doesn't build any important item for your Aphelios or Xayah. Like, yeah, it could build Shojin, but Xayah can kind of use anything. So what you can do with this item instead is build something like a Protector's Vow, a Redemption, an Adaptive Helm. There are a lot of different things you can consider here, because again, this item component is not important in this team comp. So if you start with like a sword, a tier, and a chain vest, you might be tempted to just build the Shojin and drop it on your Xayah later, but you don't need to do that every time. You could instead build something like a Protector's Vow, and then save the sword for more critical items like Infinity Edge. You also have the option of not needing to wait for best in slot items and just slam strong early game items to win now. A great example of that is Sunfire Cape. Most people know that in the late game, you probably want a Morello in your backline for anti-heal, because it applies to more units if you put it on an AoE unit. And then for your tank, you do like Warmogs, Bramble, and Dragonclaw. Like, that's the typical setup that most people do. But in the early game, if you have a Chain Vest and a Giant's Belt, building a Sunfire Cape is going to save you like 20 health, which means you could play much more greedily in the mid to late game and then get a much stronger cap out just because you slammed that item in the early game. Yeah, it's true that your anti-heal effect in the late game is not going to hit as many units because you're just hitting the tanks. And yes, it's also true that your tank's going to be a little squishier because he doesn't have 3 pure tank items on him. But you get the added bonus of just having so much more health than everyone else that you can get 2-star legendaries to cap out instead because of the advantage you gained in the early game. Like, you don't have to wait for perfect items. If on a composition guide you see someone with Bramble, D-Claw, Warmogs, you don't always have to go for those exact items, because some units use very flexible items. Another mistake I see in the early game is overcommitting to a win streak. How many times have you leveled up to level 4 on 2-1 and lost anyways, or even do an early level to 5 on 2-2 or 2-3? I bet it happens more often than you think. What's important to know is that high elo players only commit to win streaking when their board is actually strong, not when they're just hoping to win. What does this mean? It means you got a strong early game augment, such as like an item augment. It means you have upgrades for both your frontline and your backline, and you also have items that make sense for these units. If you don't meet all these requirements, oftentimes it's not worth win streaking, unless of course you used tip 1 and scouted earlier and figured out the whole lobby was piss weak. The way to fix this though is by only pushing for streaks in the early game if you have everything that I talked about before. Otherwise, you can most often just chill and save your econ and power spike a little bit later on. Next, I want to talk about synergy, but not in the way that most people think. Normally when people think about synergy, they think about traits, they think about like frontline backline balance. But what about macro synergy, or like big game plan strategy synergy? A lot of people mess this up, because one common mistake I see so much when people do something like a fast 8, for example, is that they take a lose streak augment and then try to fast 8, when a lot of fast 8 comps revolve around win streaking and playing while you're ahead. Think of something like the 7 Anima Squad comp. What are the key things that make this comp do well? It's going to revolve around hitting 2-star Leona and 2-star Xayah in the mid game and getting Aurora 2-star in the late game. And obviously you want to do some sort of standard level or fast 8 to hit that comp, but hitting all that stuff is very expensive. So you want to play this from a place where you're ahead, where you're win streaking, getting a lot of gold from that, and also preserving your health total so you could sacrifice some rounds in stage 4 to build up your econ even larger and then eventually hit them in your roll downs. A lot of fast 8 comps play like this, and I think a lot of people, they take a lose streak augment, they play fast 8 because their items match up for it, or they get like the trait unit start for it, and then they often wonder why they're 30 health in stage 4. Even if you hit your roll down, you're gonna lose 2 rounds and just die out that game. So imagine the games where you don't hit your roll down and you're 30 health by that time. Doing pure lose streak starts are completely god awful for fast 8ing, and if you do take some sort of econ augment to fast 8, you need to make sure you use that gold to level up relatively quickly so that you can survive a lot of rounds by having a lot more units than the other players. But again, this whole concept is misalignment between your augment and your strategy. Most of the time people lose streak, they do something like a reroll comp. That way they can stabilize in stage 3, because if you lose all 5 rounds in stage 2, you're going to be at 70 health. If you lose 2 more rounds, you're going to be at 50, but if you lose 5, you're going to be at like 30 at the end of stage 3. In stage 4, you start losing 15 health per round. So if you do the math on when to roll, when to stabilize, it doesn't really work out for fast 8 comps if you're lose streaking the entire time. So just make sure whatever augment you pick actually lines up with whatever strategy you're using. I'm not saying the combos I talked about can never work, you just have to play them a little differently. Next, I want to talk about the carousel. On stage 2-1, you have a lot of things to do. So you need to set up your board, you need to decide whether you want to level up or stay level 3, you need to pick your augment, but you also need to slam items and plan for your items ahead. The example before we used was having a sword, a tier, and a chain vest and doing some sort of attack damage comp. You built the Protector's Vow, but what are you doing with that sword? Oftentimes you're going to be building stuff like Infinity Edge, so you have to think about, oh, I need the glove on Carousel. Pretty obvious, right? But what if you don't get the glove? What if you're a later pick or someone snipes it before you get it? You have to think of backup options. So that could either be going for a specific champion. Maybe you want to stabilize with like a Jinx and have Jinx be your item holder. So you pick up Jinx in the carousel. Maybe you have to settle for something like a Deathblade. Or maybe you think about building the second item, which is maybe like a Rageblade, a Runon's Hurricane, or another tank item. It depends when you're picking on the carousel, but you have to think of backup plans to whatever you're going for in the first place. Obviously, you want the glove to build the IE, but everything we plan in life doesn't always work out the way we think it will. So always plan ahead for the carousel. Don't get caught with your pants down once your little legend gets released. And for bonus points, if you followed step 1 and scouted, you could even grief a key item from one of your opponents if you're picking at the same time. Speaking about not thinking ahead, you need to start thinking ahead to stage 3-2 in the early game. Like, if you build your game plan from the start, everything falls into place. If you're doing a reroll comp, you generally want to do a roll down on stage 3-2 to stabilize, right? But what if you're on something like Scuttle Puddle or Gold Subscription, where you get like a ton of gold in the early game and you could actually hit level 6 on 3-1 instead of 3-2? In those games, you're going to be doing it on 3-1 instead. These are things you need to think about when the game starts in stage 2. Once you kind of decide what direction you're going, you need to have a plan for every part of the game. Obviously, stage 3-2 being one of the major decision points. You also should try to create some sort of flowchart in your head. For example, there are going to be games where you hit everything for free and other games where you don't hit anything at all. What are you going to do on stage 3-2 based on those two scenarios? Well, if you hit everything, maybe you could just greed and save up a lot of econ instead. But if you're not hitting, you need to decide whether you want to roll down to 30 gold, roll down to 10 gold, or roll everything you're holding at that time. It helps to plan this so you don't do anything in a panic, because I feel like panicking is one of the biggest issues that affect people who don't play like 10 games a day. Because as I watch a lot of replays from coaching, I notice that people do make a lot of panic plays that they know not to do, but they do anyways. The way to avoid that, again, is just by planning ahead. I'm guilty of this mistake too. Here's a video of me doing my 3-2 roll down, but I forgot to level up to level 6. I ended up hitting nothing, and I was wondering the whole time where my Rengar is, but by the time I realized that, I was at 0 gold, and I just FF'd that game as an 8th. Now let's talk about more micro stuff in stage 2, and I talk about this all the time in TFT, but it's about balancing your frontline and backline. There are a lot of games where you hit a lot of upgrades, but they're all weird units that might not synergize together that well. For example, you might might have a Kindred and Kog'Maw 2-star, which is great because they're a great backline unit that synergize with each other. But then you also get like a 2-star Seraphine. While in theory, it sounds great that you have 3 2-star units and you try to play for a win streak, it's not always that easy because you need a tank. If you put 3 damage units out there and a 1-star tank, your team's not going to do very well. So it might sound a little weird, but you might want to wait before you hit the level up button because you're not going to win a lot of rounds like that. So how do you fix this issue? Well, let's say that you are in that same exact scenario we described before. You might want to focus on slamming a tank item, maybe like a Crown Guard or a Warmog, something that works really well without needing to scale with the unit. Something like a Dragon Claw wouldn't do that well because Dragon Claw is really good on someone who's already very tanky by making them even more tanky. You want to focus instead on items that give you a lot more base stats rather than scaling stats. Another thing you could do is maybe pick an augment that gives you more frontline, maybe something that gives you more health, or maybe get the Golem that has all 3 tank items. There are a lot of options you could do to kind of salvage this and create some sort of like makeshift frontline. But of course, you could always forgo the win streak plan and go for a lose streak instead. But pretty much you should always aim between striking a balance between frontline and backline, because if not, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. The next micro mistake I want to point out is holding non-critical 3-cost units. I see this happen literally all the time. If you're playing Anima Squad, for example, and you hit an early Yuumi, you might think like, great, I have a Yuumi. Yuumi belongs in Anima Squad, and she's a pretty key unit because she has a lot of different traits. A lot of times you actually don't want to hold on to the Yuumi because she costs so much gold and doesn't help you win in a lot of games because who are your item holders in Anima Squad? It's going to be some sort of attack damage item holder because you're more focused on Xayah rather than Aurora, because Xayah is something you hit earlier, so you want to stabilize around that. So if you build like IE, Last Whisper, things like that, like what's Yuumi going to do to help you with that? Like absolutely nothing, right? So Yuumi ends up being like a huge waste of gold unless you end up using her to hit 5 Anima Squad, but you typically don't hit level 5 until stage 2-5. So if you hold her in the early game, you're going to be missing out on a lot of gold, and that gold really adds up and anti-snowballs your economy. On the flip side, sometimes there are units that are 3 costs that are very critical to your game plan. For example, in Exotech, Mordekaiser is a great tank for both stage 2 and stage 3, and he could actually just hold all your tank items and do really, really well for any Exotech comp. So obviously you want to buy him and play him. But something like a Yuumi, not that important, because when you do play for fast 8, you need a ton of econ, so you need all the money you can get. Next, I want to talk about 2 similar mistakes that people make all the time in the early game, which is itemizing 1-star units and building the wrong early game items. One classic scenario I see all the time is building a Gunblade, putting it on your Seraphine because Gunblade's good on Vhagar that you want to reroll later on. And then you watch the fight and your 1-star Seraphine is not doing anything at all with the Gunblade and you ended up wasting that item slam. This happens all the time, and the reason why Gunblade is bad is because it's a scaling item. It works really well if you already do a lot of damage because it's based off of the percent damage that you deal. So in the early game, you're not dealing that much damage, so something like a Gunblade is completely god-awful. Something that's really good in the early game is something like a Static Shiv if you want to try to win streak because it deals a lot of flat damage and gives pretty good stats to your units. And even though it's not like a mainstay item that you see in a lot of team comps, you're going to be able to blow through a lot of people in the early game if you build that. Obviously, it depends on the meta you're in. But other examples of bad item slams might be something like Jeweled Gauntlet, Giant Slayer, and things like that. What are some good items to slam early? Well, it's going to be stuff that gives a lot of raw stats. Stuff like Archangel Staff and Rageblade are both really good because they scale during the long early game fights. Generic tank items are pretty good because they fit in every team comp, so stuff like Warmogs, Sunfire Cape are going to work out really well. Items that are flexible such as Adaptive Helm are really good, and Thieves Glove. And then lastly, items that are like decent throughout the game because that's just how they work. Like not everything's super strong in the early game and weak in the late game and vice versa. Would be something like a Spear of Shojin. Like you need the item eventually because pretty much your main carry uses it, and Spear of Shojin is pretty much like the same power level throughout the whole game. So obviously that makes it a good early game item because you need it on your late game carries eventually. But those are examples of some good items. And then lastly, you want to slam them on 2-star units. Like 1-star units with items are completely useless most of the time unless they're like a 3 cost in the early game. So even if you're building like a lot of traits around one unit, if they're 1-star, like they're not going to carry your team in most cases. So only try to win streak with the item slam if you have the 2-star and an item that actually works for them. I'm not saying never itemize 1-star units. Like sometimes you do put it on them because you want to kill 1 or 2 units as you lose streak and limit your HP loss. But in a lot of cases, I see a lot of people making the mistake of trying to win streak and managing their items completely wrong. Speaking of chipping away at a couple of units, what you want to do is focus fire. Like I see a lot of people not doing a focus fire. Like for example, a standard setup you might see is like maybe you have bastions with like the rapid fires, and you kind of spread out your units a little bit, and you end up not killing too much, and things live with 1 HP. A popular positioning setup that a lot of high rated people are using is grouping their units up like this. Like you typically never do this in the late game. Like you could look at any team comp. For example, on bunnymuffins.lol, like Dynamo Misfortune, we have people pretty spread out. Syndicate Reroll, people are pretty spread out. Like pretty much every comp, you'll see like one person on the left, one person on the right, and units scattered in between them. But in the early game, you don't want to do this. You want to group your units together so that they focus onto the same unit. And the good news is that it's pretty easy to do. You just put your 2 carries next to each other. The tank positioning isn't as important, but you do want to keep them together as well. But sometimes you want to split their focus so that 2 people hit Poppy, 2 people hit Jax. And sometimes if you do this, like sometimes all 4 of them hit the Jax. But pretty much always put your carries together so that they focus onto the same unit so that you guarantee 1 kill. And if you get 1 kill, it's easier to get the rest. Pretty simple stuff. Everyone should be doing this. Like too often I see people position like that and I'm just like, what are you doing? You know, there's a time and place for that with like some weird exceptions, but in most cases, just put everyone together and it'll simplify like 99% of all your TFT games. Just remember to move them later on in the game once you do face a lot of area of effect damage. I know everything we said is a lot of information. For a lot of people, it's a lot of new information. So let's just recap really quickly. So again, the biggest mistakes I see is not scouting, waiting for perfect items, overcommitting to win streaks, bad augment fit, no 3-2 plan or even planning ahead, holding units that don't actually help your board, not balancing frontline and backline, building the wrong early game items and having bad item holders for them, mispositioning, and bad carousel planning. Those are the biggest mistakes I see people make all the time through hours and hours of coaching and just by looking at other people play TFT. And the most important thing to know is that TFT isn't always just about high rolling. It's usually about minimizing your mistakes. If I could choose one superpower for TFT, it'd be consistency, because all the time I make a mistake and it's so obvious that it was a mistake and I know not to do it, but I do it anyways because maybe I was watching something stupid on my second monitor. Maybe I was not even thinking about the game in general. Maybe I was texting on my phone. It happens all the time. So I wish I could just be more consistent as my TFT superpower. But minimizing all these mistakes will build you a stable early game, which sets the groundwork for everything else in life. Well, not life, but just that TFT game. So if you can avoid all these bad habits, you'll stop bleeding HP, you'll scale better, and you'll hit top 4s and even win games more consistently. So let me know which one of these tips helped you out the most. Maybe you have some other tips that could help other people in the comments section or on Discord. If you want coaching, check out the coaching link in the description. It's free. You just have to get lucky and get picked. And check out the website while you're there as well. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully I see you all next time.